Okay, I think, yep, I'm recording now. So, we left off last week talking about black figure pottery in the archaic Greek period. And we were going to see so many black figure pots that you'll get sick of them, but we're not going to talk about every one that we see. This is one of the major art forms that fills a lot of the collections that we'll be seeing while we were abroad. So we were looking at this wonderful pot by Eusebius, which is in the Vatican. We will have a chance to look at it closely, showing Achilles and Ajax playing a dice game, right? Whiling the time away while they're waiting for the call-up to battle. And the painter has included all these elements to tell us about the story. We see their shields off to the sides. We see the helmets either cocked back on Achilles' head or placed resting on the shield. We see them holding their spears, raring to go. But the people who saw this would have known the rest of the story, which is that the two of them miss the initial call to battle because they get too wrapped up in the game. So this is sort of moral story here, right? Which I said jokingly last week is, turn off Facebook and get to work. Don't put it off until the very end. And, don't be so wrapped up in the things that you pass the time that you forget to do the things that are important. But over and above that, there are these other elements that point to the story as people would have known it at the time. And one of them, of course, is that people would have known how good of friends they were, and the fact that Ajax will eventually have to carry Achilles off the battlefield when Achilles dies. Right? And if we look at their feet, you'll notice that Ajax on the right, his heel is in front of the seat he's on, and Achilles is behind it. And that's a way of showing us, the Achilles heel is guarded, if you will. Right? It's the one vulnerable part of his body. And in this black figure vase that's in the Walters Art Museum, we see on one side Achilles falling in battle. So there's the Trojan War being fought, the two rearing horses with the figures on it, and there's Achilles down below. Underneath, this is the moment of his defeat in battle. And there we see again. And again, notice the emphasis on the heel. Right, the sort of the way in which that becomes a prominent part of the composition, as well, because this is in fact why he becomes vulnerable. And with this Walters pot, as we go around the opposite side, which we're off, we see Ajax carrying Achilles, who's now deceased, off of the battlefield. Right. So anybody looking at this would have realized that this is this really high dramatic moment. Right. Leading toward eventual tragedy. Greeks are renowned for tragedy, aren't they? Right? Greek tragedies, we talk about them all the time in the history of literature. And the pots pick up on that emphasis, the sort of idea of human drama, which we'll see is sort of central to Greek art, a humanity, and a focus on telling stories through human interaction, even if those stories involve the gods. They're told through human interaction. Right? And that's absolutely crucial. So when we talk about sculptures, we talk about how they're getting increasingly human looking, right? Increasingly realistic. Part of the reason it's moving in that direction is that the human side of these stories, the human side of art, is in fact something that the Greeks champion above almost all else. Right? Is that humanity. And we'll look at this in other ways. The other thing I want to bring us back to with these images, do I have the detail? There, let's go back there. And then we can see the dead feet of Achilles back there. And again, his heel, right there behind Ajax's feet. We can't even see his head. It's draped over the body is draped over the shoulder of Ajax here. The other thing I want to focus on is this idea of the intervention of the gods in human life, which is something we'll see again and again as we look at these pots, is that gods and humans interact in quite visible ways in these mythologies. And so Achilles, you remember, was half human, half god. And we'll see that there's a great interest in these figures from tragedies, from Greek mythology, that give us this overlap between the two rows and show that there's really no great breakdown between human life and supernatural life. It's all examples for human stories. The last thing again to focus on with this is this black figure pottery style, which remember is put on in a thin glaze of slip, not glaze, but thin clay that oxidizes when it's put into the kiln for firing and turns black, and then they come back through and scratch through it with the different designs. They do that before they put it into the kiln. So we call it black figure simply because the figures are black against the color of the pot, the red color of the pot. And as you look at black figure, you'll notice there's a fine linearity to the style. We saw with the Ezekiel's pot in particular, quite a bit of decorative detail as well. And the bodies have this shape where they're really big in the thighs and the shoulders, and particularly tiny in the wrists and the ankles. Dainty little feet, despite the fact that they have thunder thighs, monster shoulders, you know. And that's typical for this earlier style. The black figure is the earlier of the two styles of Greek face painting that we'll look at. Okay. So, we're going to look at some other images of Achilles in pots, because what I'm going to use these pots for is to talk about help us understand Greek mythology and use that as an inroad to think about Greek culture as well. And like I said, so many of these films are collections that we'll be looking at when we're in Rome. Another Walters Art Museum pot shows another scene from the life of Achilles. He becomes a major focus of archaic Greek face painting because he bridged the realms. He's half man, half God. Okay? So images that show his life give us the opportunity, give the Greeks the opportunity to remember that the world of the supernatural is deeply entwined with the world of the natural, the real. In this case, this is the story of Achilles' birth. This is how the half-man, half-god Achilles was actually born. And there's a detail in the center of that pot. His father is Peleus, who is mortal. That's him there with the beard. And you'll notice that he's wearing a laurel wreath in his hair. This is a symbol of victory. John Belushi in Animal House. Right? So she had noticed things as well. But originally it was seen as a symbol of victory in battle. And here he's wrestling with the fairer-skinned woman. Her name is Thetis, and she's a goddess. This is what leads to their mating and the birth of Achilles. Right? So he's born to a mortal father and an immortal goddess mother. And as the story, sorry? He's definitely pulling, like he's trying to pick her up, isn't he, in a way? Like he's grabbing at her. Well, what's interesting about Peleus, right, Thetis, is that the story tells us that as Peleus wants to mate with her, he's going to wrestle her down. It's horrible, right, if you think about it, right? That's great, isn't it? Well, she's a goddess, so she can probably do anything she wanted to. That. In any event, in order to get him to stop, she went through a series of transformations where she turned into all these horrifying creatures, one after the other, hoping to scare him away. Right? And he refuses to let go. At which point she says, fine, you're a better man than most, blah, 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 blah. Right? Greek myths are really misogynist, It's a bunch of male-oriented crap. Right? Just go with it for now, right? Rather than sort of shutting it out, So anyway, what's interesting here is that she looks like a woman rather than one of these horrifying creatures, these half-animal beasts that she turns into. So what we're seeing is at the very end of the wrestling match, right? Where she's gone through all the transformations and now she's about to succumb. And this would account for why he's wearing the laurel wreath in his hair, right? The victory wreath is that he's won. Okay? So our artist has turned, instead of to the supernatural part of the story, which is where she's going through the transformation, she's turned to the more human side of it, where basically Thetis is agreeing to be the mother of Peleus' right? So it's moving toward that particular element. And again, it's about even though she's a goddess, it's told in the form of a human embrace between these two different figures. The other figures around, the two women that are on either side with the arms up to the side, are actually, in this case, her sisters. But often we find when we look at images of Greek mythology that around the central mythological scene, we also have images of women that are there for no explanatory reason. They're not part of the story. They're just there as, we think, maybe the Greek chorus from dramas that we often see off to the side of the stage, who address the audience and sing about what's going on to emphasize the drama. That could be it. Or perhaps embodiments of inspiration, what we might call a muse, someone who inspires action. That's a possibility as well. But in this particular case, if we look back at the legend of Peleus and Thetis, we know that Thetis was accompanied by her two sisters. And that gives it some particular narrative resonance that we don't find in other pots where women just happen to appear. And there's nothing that says it can't be both. And it can't function more than one way. Right? So the outcome of this side of the pot is that they eventually will mate and give birth to Achilles. Now, you might think the Greek art, is very staid and wouldn't show that. That's because I'm not showing you some really skanky stuff. But there are plenty of incredibly skanky scenes in Greek pottery to be seen. I will give one slightly a little bit later, but nothing really, really rotten. Nothing NC-17 in this class, right? But the bottom line is, if we go around the other side of the pot, what we have on the opposite side is the same pot seen from the back, and most pots are, in fact, decorated on both sides. We see the next scene in the story, if you will, where Peleus now is taking his young son Achilles, and he's handing him over to be educated by nature itself. And in this case, that's represented by this centaur, half man, half horse. That's what a centaur is. Just like, remember a minotaur we talked about before, King Minos's minotaur was half man, half bull. So the centaur is half man, half horse, and there Peleus, the father, after the wrestling match, after inspiring, is now handing over baby Achilles in the middle to Chiron, his wise old centaur teacher, who was quite a famous teacher at the time. And the idea is that Achilles, even though he's past God, will be trained sort of, in all the things of the world, if you will. And I love the cute little deer down below, the sign that he's come out of the woods to help him. But I also love the human element because, even though Achilles has these rippling thigh muscles and huge, calf muscles, he feels like a little kid. He's like, Daddy. And I don't want to go with the centaur. He's reaching out to Peleus, please don't send me off with Mr. Horsey Man. And then, there's that human element. It really turns on human interaction, which is what we saw on the opposite side as well, where that story of this great myth of this transforming goddess is really told in quite human terms. Right? And that's something that we see quite often in Greek art, that they will give a very human face to their mythologies and to their gods and to their humans. Okay? So this idea of this interest in Achilles that we're seeing here is in part inspired because he is one of these numerous figures in Greek mythology that bridge the world of the gods and the men. Right? He stands in between the two. He traffics easily in both. And we'll find that other figures from mythology that the Greeks are most interested in their archaic period also stand between these two worlds. Right? Stand between the worlds of the gods and the worlds of men. And the other figure that we see so often in archaic Greek pots and in black figure pottery is the figure of Heracles. The Romans called him Hercules, right? But the Greeks called him Heracles. So, I don't care. Really, we try to be politically correct and kind of Greek, right? But it might be easier to remember him as Hercules. But he's again another half-god hero of Greek mythology. His father was Zeus, the king of the gods. And Zeus was a naughty boy, man. He had a taste for women, human women. And the problem was that he would often have to disguise himself because if human women mate with gods, it could destroy them. Right? And anyway, he meets this woman named Alcmene and mates with her and gives birth to Heracles. Now, interestingly, when Heracles was first born, he took his mother's name, Alcmenes, which is a birth name, right? But he changes it to Heracles after Zeus' wife, who's not his mother, right? His stepmother, I guess. Because Zeus' wife is Hera. And she, as you might imagine, is pretty jealous of her philandering husband, Zeus, who's sleeping with all these mortal women, right? And she gets so jealous that at first Alcmenes changes his name to Heracles to please her, right? To try to get her a good title. Take your name, son of Hera. Even though it's not the son of Hera, right? That's son of Hera. Doesn't work. She still hates him. And because he's a sign of her jealousy, or, of her husband's unfaithfulness. It's living sign of her. So at one point she's going to try and destroy Heracles, and she drives him temporarily insane, where he doesn't know what he's doing. And while he's insane, he kills his wife and children. It's horrible, isn't it? She's going to drive him off the end. And in order to atone for that sin, even though it's not his fault, right? He still has to atone for his actions. In order to atone for the actions of having killed his wife and children, he is conscripted to do a series of 12 labors of physical feats that were considered to be impossible. But because he's half God, he can do it, and also he's smart as all get out. He figures out a loophole in every one of them in order to use the loophole in order to make it work. He figures out a way. Right? So the 12 labors of Hercules become this really important thing that we see quite a bit in vase painting, where he's out trying to atone for the sin of having killed his wife and children. And remember, if we try to put ourselves in the mind that the Greeks would have seen this, they know that Heracles is doing this with the full knowledge of what he's done wrong. He didn't do it wrong, right? It was Heracles. But the gods are above judgment. It's humans that are fail, right? And so when we see him performing these feats, you have to keep in mind that the back of my mind is constantly remembering this is because I killed my wife and children. Which is horrible, right? He didn't want to do it. Right? It's not like he's crazy. Well, he was crazy. I mean, it's not like he's psychotic, right? A criminal. Right? This is something that keeps constantly reminded of, okay? So the very first of these labors, the very first one he set out to do is to go kill this lion, the Nemean lion. And the story behind the Nemean lion is that it had fur, a skin, that could not be pierced. So how do you kill a lion whose skin cannot be pierced? Does anybody know how he does this? Close. What's a bigger opening than the eye? Or the nose? The mouth. He goes in through the mouth. Right? And after he goes into the mouth, he doesn't have to worry about piercing the skin. Finds an opening in the skin and uses that to kill the Nemean lion. Now, in this particular scene, you see them wrestling. And the lion is obviously very fierce. It's got one of its hind legs up to claw at his head, the other one wrapped around his back and tearing at him. You'll also notice that Heracles is naked. it's a sort of a man-to-man battle, if you will, or man-to-beast battle here. And oftentimes we see that when he goes about the actual labors himself, he gets rid of his armor in order to do it, so that he can actually complete the labor, right? Come out victorious based on his own innate strength and cunning, rather than relying on superior firepower, right? So being naked for him is really important here, in that it shows that he's relying solely on himself. You'll also notice that he's been trying with the sword, and he decided that it didn't hit him anywhere. And he's dropped it onto the floor down below. And our black figure potter has shown it in profile rather than laying flat on the ground, so that we can see it clearly and realize where we are in the story, where he's about to move from trying to do it with the help of superior firepower to doing it with his own bare hands, right? And as the legend goes, after he defeats the Nemean lion, he uses the lion's own claws to skin it. And he wears the skin as his armor. So that from this point forward in the legend of Heracles, we often see him with a lion's skin draped over his shoulders. This is the skin of the Nemean lion that becomes his own personal armor, because it still remains impervious to everything but the lion's own claws. Right? So, if we want to identify Heracles in works of art, it's sometimes very, very easy. Because he's one of the few guys that walks around with a lion's skin on. Right? Sometimes even with the head draped over the top of his head like a helmet. Right? It's kind of disgusting this way. But, people wear fur all the time. Well, they used to more, before PETA started throwing paint on them and whatnot. But still, I got leather on my shoes. That's probably fake fur. It's fake fur on your boots, but there's probably leather on the bottom, or is it suede? Oh, good for you. But you've got leather shoes on. How much more disgusting is the skin of cattle wrapped around your feet? Arguably not that much, right? And they keep them dry and safe from passing trucks or falling rocks or whatever. They're your Heracles' skin or feet, right? So that's our story here, right? In this case, you'll notice that in addition to Heracles, you've got these two figures standing on either side, a man and a woman. And this becomes more problematic as to who they are, because I don't think that they're described in the story itself. Now, usually two women, and in fact in my notes I said two women because on my computer screen very, very small. And I couldn't tell that the guy on the left was a guy, right? I just had it assumed. And okay, yes, there's a beard. I just didn't see it, right? And of course there's the other bit, right? But there's a woman on the right, and from the skin tone you can see that she's a woman as well. And I don't think that they're explained in the story. So again, they become this idea of personifications of inspiration personified, right? Inspiration given human form, and almost singing out and gesturing around this central act. Yeah. They did, but if they did, they would still show, they wouldn't have done it with a full beard, right? Yeah. But they would have shaved, and in the pot, which is a photograph, right, it would have shown it as a woman anyway, right? So I think that needs more research to figure out exactly who the two are, because the man is a bit of a question for me, right? So this is our first labor of Hercules. We're going to look at some of the other ones from this group, also looking at these local pots or pots we're going to see while we're abroad. The fourth labor of Hercules was to chase this bull on Mount, and this is a mouthful, but the Erymanthian boar. Erymanthus. To chase this boar, to capture it. Again, according to the myth, the boar devoured everything in its path. Right? Even humans that might try to catch it. So what Heracles does is to give chase. rather than stand in front of it, let it come at him and try to fight it, he just chases it down. And he starts running after it all over Mount Erymanthus until the boar got so tired that it just gave up. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? Right? I don't understand why this one is such a big deal, right? Why not just chase the boar? But what he does is when he gets so tired, he puts it on his shoulder and carries it back to his home city of Mycenae. I remember the Mycenaeans we talked about? Heracles was supposed to be from Mycenae. And it was the king of Mycenae who actually commanded him, being told by the gods, to go do those 12 labors. Right? They worked through a human to send him out. Right? And Eurystheus of Mycenae is trying to hide from the boar as Heracles brings it back. So he's got the boar now, he's chased it down, he's gotten it tired, he's going to eat anything in its path. He's scaring the crap out of the guy that set him out to do this, right? He's going to go, oh, please don't put him in front of me because he'll eat me if you let go, if I'm in his path now, right? And this is then, of course, to show the hero Heracles versus the coward, right, who's playing a hand in his torment over the years, right? Hiding in a jar that's buried in the ground and asking for mercy from Heracles. Again, we have figures flanking it on either side, and I think in this particular case they are both women. And again, probably that idea of the muses, because note how common it is to flank the heroic scene with two figures that almost are like parentheses around it, to offset it from the rest of the plot. And that's something we see so often in Greek art, this idea of embodiment of inspiration, cheering on our figure. I don't think that Heracles or King Eurystheus sees them at all. I don't think they're really there in the physical sense. What I think they are these figures like a Greek chorus that don't really take part in the action, but are there to comment on it. And there's one of the women figures. Again, the really refined line of black figure painting that delineates the hem of the garment, but also the flowing robe over her arm, and the way it laces around her feet as well. And we keep in mind how this was made, both the different oxides that are put into it to fire at different colors, like even those touches of burgundy within the robe, but then how it's been scratched through to give you the detail inside the line. On the back, this is the same jug. We turn around the back, right? An amphora is a wine jug. We've looked at the earliest amphoras that we saw were burial jugs, but we've gotten past that now. An amphora is a storage jar for wine. And appropriate for a storage jar for wine, we have on the back of it Dionysus, the god of wine. And in this particular case, here's an aged Dionysus with a beard. And he's got a cup, a wine cup, right? Storage versus drinking. He's got a wine cup that he's handing off to one of his female followers standing here. And he's surrounded on either side by these figures who are hybrid creatures. They're half man and half goat. They're called satyrs, S-A-T-Y-R-S. And there's one on either side. They look like mostly man here, but you notice the tail that comes off, right? And they are Dionysus's entourage, for lack of a better word, right? His cohorts, colleagues. All of Dionysus's best friends are often half human, half animal. Because wine makes you stupid, right? Wine makes you lose your natural human ability to reason. That's the theory, right? So these two much of it does. So the people he hangs out with are these hybrid creatures that are half human, half animal. And in this case, they're playing tight. One of them is, I believe, as we move our way around. Let's see what's coming up here. Right. So we move around the back here. There's a figure that she's in, and there's our other satyr here you can see, I guess the other thing that points is those are slightly R-rated figures, right? Full frontal nudity and erect, no less. So he's enjoying being with Dionysus just a little bit, right? But again, these are the cohort of Dionysus. That's fairly common with images of satyrs. Gosh, it's one of the Vatican collection that I saw. There's probably more than one, but there's one that I remember seeing that I was part of this class, where again, satyrs walking around with very prominent erections, right? Showing off their man. So it's not uncommon. So here's our third labor of Hercules. I'm not going to go through 12 by any means. Where he's captured in Lesbian War, and because it's on a wine pot, we find an unrelated scene on the back of it, which is the scene of Achilles serving wine surrounded by the rest of his entourage. Another of the labor of Hercules is represented here, or at least alluded to. Hercules with the Triton. On his way to his 11th labor, right? He's getting close to the end now. He actually got through 10 of them. Because at first the penalty was to do 10 labors, and he did them, and he went back and they said, guess what, there's 2 more. Like, imagine if we did that to you. Right? Guess what, you've got 1 more assignment that you have to do for me. Right? You weren't planning it. I gave him 2 more to do. And on his way to the 11th one, he meets the old man of the sea, whose name is Nereus, Nereus, who is a shapeshifter. He just keeps changing form, right? And he often appears as a sea creature with a human head, right? Now, the problem with this pot is that it's not an old man that he's meeting here. You can see, here's the detail coming up, that in fact, there's Heracles here, in my other side as well, and this is the sea serpent that he's fighting against with his 4th tail here. And the face of the sea serpent isn't an old man, but significantly younger, and there's a label above with the words that say, not Nereus, but Triton. And that has confused people to no end, because it seems to depict one of the labors moving forward. But the problem is when you read the labor, it doesn't mention anything about Triton. And yet here it says this person's name is Triton. And in fact, if you look through all of written Greek mythology, all of it, there's no figure named Triton, but he's on a ton of different pots. So this is this weird thing. Most of the Greek pots that we've seen are actual illustrations of known written mythologies, right? Illustrating well-known stories from the legend of Heracles, from the legend of Achilles. In this case, Triton doesn't appear in any of them. And so there are 2 possibilities for how we explain this. One, there's some missing text, right? It's old enough that we might be missing some text, but most people think that's kind of unlikely. And that instead, a more likely idea is that it was invented specifically for pots, because the only pots it appears on are pots that were made in the city of Athens. In other words, it doesn't appear in pots that might have been made in some of the outposts, other places. It's only in Athenian pots, or what we call Attic pots, which is the way of saying Athenian production, Attic pots. And, sorry? And that's what it comes down to, right? I mean, well, we can still look back and they won't have it written down yet. You know, there's no writings that mention Triton. So what we think, this is what we think. If it's only Athenian pots, then maybe we should look into some sort of Athenian mentioning, like an Athenian cultural issue, right? Like that. Well, one of the things that's fascinating is that the city of Athens had adopted as their symbol Heracles. Okay? So they see themselves as, he's like the patron saint, right? For lack of a better word. Put a Christian symbol, right? He is their symbol. They are like Heracles. And one of the things that in the 6th century Athens is priding itself on is its naval strength. It's military strength at sea. So what we think is that rather than being a myth that surrender, or their own legends or whatever, it's meant as a symbol for Athens' ability to conquer people and the ocean, right? Doesn't that kind of make sense? So you make up a totally different story to go with that and illustrate an Athens on these black figure pots that come from Athens, right? And there were numerous victories that people pointed to in particular, but the bottom line is all about naval superiority, right? The Athenian fleet and its strength, told now through well-known figures from mythology. In this case, Heracles, their patron. What's coming up? Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a body over the sea creature, then there's like legs coming out of the sea creature, I forgot what it's called.
Triton.
That thing. And there's legs coming out, but then it looks like he has a tail.
Okay. Some kind of read the picture, right? And again, this is now pixelated with this because the camera was on a fairly right? So that's the head of the Triton here, right? This is the head of Heracles there. And because it's black on black, it makes it a little bit look at it. But so this is his head. And the body, right, comes like this. Like that, okay? And then there's the head. That much you've read okay, yeah? And then the question is, how does this then articulate, right? Because the figure of Triton seems to have an arm that comes here, with an elbow and an arm. That's Heracles, this is his shoulder and his arm grabbing onto, right? Okay. Now, how does the rest of it work, right? This looks like it's Heracles' chest there, right? Actual coming out here, right? And I think the key goes over the back of it here. And you're good to read those legs. How do the legs work in you? Can someone help me out with that? Right? Because here's Heracles' other arm back here. I'm not sure. Right. So if this was a snake, you can over like this. I agree with you there, and I think that this is an interesting point that Sylvia and Tammy are mentioning here, is that there's an awkward, let's go look at it more closely than there. Well, hold that thought for 2.5 weeks. I'll point it out and I'll ask you about it, and then maybe we'll be able to see it then. I want to make a bigger point about this, but I'm like, okay, what's the case? We'll have to take a bit away from this, right? Question. A couple of things that we see as we look at the development. We're going to look at the development of statuary in the 500. We saw that they moved from being rather simple to a little bit more naturalist, right? We moved in the 14th. We wound up with that guy with the arcade as well. But also have these massive legs, right? Massive thighs and really big shoulders, right? It's going to but we saw that it's getting more complex. More anatomically detailed. And I think we're going to see the same thing here as well. But, even at 540 BC, right, which is only about halfway through the 6th century, what we're seeing is still some difficulty, right? That's some confusion that seems to come out of it. And insofar as that's concerned, there are two things to keep in mind. One is, we'll see that sort of interesting complicated poses that we're seeing here gets better. It gets more organic, so it does work together better. In about 20 years, that's what they do. Two, not all art moves in the same direction as space, right? There's nobody ahead of time has set up the dominoes and kind of all fall over. It's not set up that way. That's not the way the world works. That's not the way history develops. Right? We see ruptures in development. So I could show you other things from exactly the same time, which is down and organically evolved. Because it's not all by the same process, right? And that brings up number 3, which is that insofar as with puberty, sometimes there's signs like you see here, we talked about the very beginning, signs of body, features, A, B, and A, right? But there's a range of potters out there working with a range of relevant qualities, right? And there are the ones that can command more money, did command more money, were of a higher quality, and other ones that fall into other categories. And so we actually identified these today. There's a name for the same different pot, but there's a bunch of pots that are stylistically similar. So you look at them and say, that resembles this. Right? And I can't remember what it's called, but I don't care if you remember what it's called. But the point is that within this development that I'm trying to check and simplify, which is development toward greater realism, the line isn't just right? And we're going to find places where, in fact, it's really difficult to read. And this one is really difficult to read. I think we're looking at, I think part of it is that that snake that is Triton is meant to go back in space, right? It starts here, and then as it gets down to the bottom, it moves back that way. But it plays out in a sort of flattened out. And then where his legs are end up not working, but maybe it does. You know, and if it was not a wrestling match anyway, and I'm not, you have a lot more flexibility than I do. Sorry? Just plain what? Twister, exactly. Yeah.
In other, like, clearer pictures,
did you find it other pictures?
well, there's like other like institutions, I guess, but it looks like he's actually riding the figure, so it would make sense that his body positions like that. So this left leg is actually over the creature.
And this is what is coming out there. Okay, so
wrapped around
here, right?
Oh,
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, what's interesting for the people, there are very few of you that studio art pictures, but part of it is to realize that when you're making art, you don't have to alter things to make a more interesting composition out of it as well.
If we could figure out if he was writing him,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably like so that we can tell that he's like peeking his head out of something.
And isn't that much bigger than Triton's head?
Yes.
Do you think? Yes. Now, be careful because look at the shape of this pot. And remember that I'm taking this right. I got a camera in front of it, and Triton's head is actually on this part of the pot. And Heracles' head is right on the part that's closest to it. So I'd be careful about going too far there, because on the slide on the left, it looks like they're closer to the same size. Might be slightly bigger, but again, okay, if you want an answer to it, I think I can come up with one. Right? And that is that part of Heracles as a mythological figure, right, is this man who is part human, part God. Okay? The gods give him strength, but the human gives him rationality. So, might he have a larger head? The problem with that is he doesn't consistently. There's lots of pictures of Hercules raised up as mountain. Well, he's a monster body and a kind of tiny little head as well. So, it could just be, as Sylvia was saying, it could totally be the style of the figure to make it look as if he's leaning up toward us, right, and closer to us. But the Greeks aren't good with perspective that way, you know? That's not what their strengths are. We find the Romans are, but the Greeks less. The 12th labor. This is by an artist who seems to have known the works of Exekius, who we looked at to begin with. He was the one that did Achilles and Ajax, right? And this is part of it. Looks like his works, but for connoisseurs, it's not as good as works by Exekius. Let me take a circle of Exekius. So this is his 12th labor, the very last one, and the hardest of them all for a number of different reasons. And the labor required that he goes to the kingdom of Hades. Now, Hades is the Roman name for Pluto, the god Pluto, who is the god of the underworld. Underworld. Hades is Pluto. Pluto is the god of hell, right? Only they don't call it hell. It's not like but this is where it comes from, right? Because for the Greeks, the kingdom of Pluto, the kingdom of Hades, was where everybody went when they died. Everybody, good or bad. But in the kingdom of Hades, if you were bad, you got punished. Whereas if you were good, you went on living okay. Right? So, Christians sort of took this and gave it the heaven hell thing, right? Where you go to different places. But for the Greeks, you all went to the same place. Right? You all went to the kingdom of Hades, okay? And the job that Hercules is given is to go there and get the hellhound that guards the gate, whose name is Kerberos. That is the dog that guards the gate of the kingdom of Hades. Kerberos. Right? So, before we get into the myth, a couple things that are interesting about this, and one is that for the Greeks, the afterlife is life. You go from one kingdom to another kingdom, and everybody goes there. Because for the Greeks, humanity lies at the core of everything, right? So you just keep living, but you keep living somewhere else. Now, this hellhound that guards the gates, this is what made, by the way, this is what made the capturing the hellhound. What made this labor so terribly difficult for Heracles was the fact that no one had ever gone to Hades and come back again. Right? You went to Hades and you stayed there. Right? That's the underworld. That's the afterlife. That's the other kingdom. You don't come back. You're dead. Right? You're not part of this world anymore. So for Heracles, who's half human, to go to Pluto's kingdom, to go to Hades, and come back again, was itself impossible. Add to that he's got to bring back this vicious beast that guards the gates. And that makes it doubly difficult. In addition to that, Kerberos is not just any ordinary dog. Kerberos had multiple heads. In some stories he's got 3. That's what you see the most. Sometimes he's got 12. And in addition to that, his tail is a dragon. And you can see that. The tail turns into something with an eye on it back there as well. But this made this hound that much more frightening, that much more difficult to fight. Kerberos, the hound of hell, right? Furthermore, and this is not well illustrated here, but sometimes we see it, and I think there's some allusion to this, the hair on its mane, down its back, turned into snakes as well. Wouldn't it be a great, computer image, graphic image, right? 3-headed hounds with a dragon for a tail and snakes up and down its back, right? And here you can see the white stripes that don't really look like snakes, but kind of allude to that part of its legend, right? I should mention here as well that just like everybody's related on the human side, these monsters are all related to each other. Kerberos was the uncle to the Nemean lion. They both had half god, half monster parents at some point as well. So, uncle to the lion. Well, so Heracles is going to go beat him, defeat him, bring him back. And when he gets down to the kingdom of Hades, Pluto tells him that you're free to take Kerberos back only if you can defeat him with your brute strength alone. Right? So you'll notice, I think I've got a detail coming up here, and the pot has some damage to it. It's been filled in the slide on your right, but here you can see it open. This is again why Heracles is shown naked, right? Only with his brute strength, and he's not wearing, I don't think he's wearing the Nemean lion skin, he's got something over his shoulder, I don't think it's his. But they make a point of showing him naked in order to show that he's going to defeat Kerberos with his brute strength. And what he does in the legend is he grabs the heads. All around all three of the heads, or however many there are in that particular version of the legend, the dragon tail bites him while he's doing this, and you can see that that's alluded to here by the dragon tail wrapping around behind him there. And eventually he's able to sort of wrestle him down. He's able to do it by brute strength. Takes him back to the king of Mycenae, just like he did with the boar, right? And Mycenae says, great, you've done it. Let the dog go. And the dog gets to go back to Hades because they need him there, right, to guard the gates of hell. So no one else can get back out again, right? So Heracles here has defeated even death itself. Right? One of the things that we'll see later on is this makes Heracles a very strong metaphor for life after death. And that even when we get to ancient Rome, we will find numerous coffins, sarcophagi, decorated with images of Heracles, because he defeats death. And this is an interesting point for you. Not that he is Jesus, but one of the things that happens, and this is in Dr. Flanagan's class, one of the things that happens is that when Christian artists begin to come up with pictorial ways of illustrating their stories, right, rather than reinvent the wheel from scratch, one of the things that we see them do is look back to Greek and Roman mythology and grab onto the ones that are easily translated into Christian themes. Right? So Heracles becomes one of the major ways we see sort of picked up as he's half man, half God, right? He defeats death itself, right? He goes into the underworld and he comes back, right? If you're trying to come up with certain ideas of how to defeat Christ, you get all of those things. Wouldn't that make a great choice? Right? We'll find when we get to early Christian this is across the board. And I'm not being blasphemous here. Just how do you make the image? Where do you start? And this is a good place for them to start. So you're absolutely right about that. The two women, again, are unexplained. There's one behind Heracles here, and there's one directly behind the hound. They're not in the midst of it at all. So again, they are mute figures. But the fellow at the right is Hermes, who helped Heracles get there in the first place. Right? And he's included as part of the story as well. Let's see. Let's take a break. It's 20-odd. Let's take I know it's a little bit earlier than we normally do, but it's been more than an hour. Let's take till 5 o'clock. Come back then, and we'll wrap up face painting and move our way into some sculpture.